It was supposed to be the pride of Beijing, a massive steel bridge rising above the skyline, a symbol of China's engineering power. But just 26 years after it opened, the bridge collapsed. No war, no natural disaster, simply fell. And this is not a one-time failure. Across Kenya, Pakistan, Nepal, and Southeast Asia, Chinese-funded projects, bridges, railways, airports are cracking, leaking, breaking down long before their time. This was China's master plan, the Belt and Road Initiative, a trillion-dollar push to win global influence, not with tanks, but with infrastructure. But now the plan itself is collapsing under its own weight, under its own lies. So here's the real question. What happens when the world's biggest builder cuts corners and the foundations start to crumble? The headlines were supposed to tell a different story. This was China's moment. A trillion-dollar dream to connect the world with bridges, roads, railways, and power plants. The Belt and Road Initiative, their great plan to replace American influence with steel and concrete, to build trust, win hearts, and buy loyalty. But now, the dream is cracking, and the world is starting to see what's behind the polished speeches and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. In Kenya, the flagship standard gauge railway connecting Nairobi to Mombasa was supposed to be a revolution in African transport. Instead, it's become a symbol of broken promises. The line is underused, ticket sales are nowhere near projections, and the debt burden on Kenya is crushing. In Nepal, a $216 million international airport funded and built by Chinese contractors opened with fanfare. But the air conditioning doesn't work. The terminal leaks when it rains, and there are only a handful of flights each week. Locals call it the ghost airport. In Pakistan, the expansion of the Karakoram Highway, a key artery of China's Belt and Road, has been stalled by constant repairs, safety failures, and protests from local communities. Sections of the road are already cracking and sinking long before completion. These aren't isolated failures. These are warning signs. In Beijing itself, a major highway bridge collapsed after just 26 years of use. Investigators pointed fingers at substandard materials and sloppy construction. But the damage was done. 26 years for a bridge expected to last 70. In Thailand, the audit building's supporting structures gave way during an earthquake, the only building in the area to suffer serious damage. The investigation traced the problem back to steel beams sourced from low-grade Chinese suppliers. And it keeps happening. From Laos to Indonesia, from Serbia to Sri Lanka, stories keep surfacing of Chinese-funded infrastructure projects running into disaster. Cracked highways, collapsed bridges, ports that sit empty, power plants offline due to mechanical failures. The numbers are staggering. The Yang Village Bridge in Shaanxi, China, collapsed after just 6 years in operation, killing 12 people. Multiple highway sections in southern China have been reported sinking or cracking within the first 3 years of completion. A recent survey across several Belt and Road recipient countries found that over 30% of Chinese-built projects had serious structural problems within the first 5 years. These projects were meant to win influence, to secure loyalty, to project strength. Instead, they're becoming evidence. Evidence of a system that's built for speed, not quality. Built for propaganda headlines, not lasting results. When a bridge collapses in Beijing, when a highway in Pakistan buckles under its own weight, when an airport in Nepal sits empty and leaking, it's not just concrete that's breaking. It's trust. Trust between China and the countries they were trying to win over. Trust in the promise that Made in China can deliver on its grand ambitions. And as the failures pile up, as the lawsuits grow, as the resentment builds across Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe, the image Beijing worked so hard to create is falling apart. Because the world is learning a hard truth. Big promises mean nothing if the foundation is rotten. The bridges are cracking. The highways are sinking. The airports are leaking. But why? This isn't about one bad contractor. This isn't about bad luck. This is about how the entire system was built. Because behind every collapsed project, there's a chain reaction. A supply chain that was designed not for quality but for speed, for scale, for short-term headlines. At the heart of China's Belt and Road Initiative is the same supply chain that fueled their rise as the world's factory. But while that model may work for cheap toys and fast fashion, it's a disaster for critical infrastructure. The bidding process on these projects, rigged, contracts handed out not to the best builders, but to politically connected firms. Subcontractors chosen for relationships, not reliability. And the materials? Steel that doesn't meet international safety standards. Concrete watered down with river sand. Structural beams cut thin to save a few yuan. In some cases, investigators found that rebar, the steel framework that holds up bridges and buildings, was swapped out for cheaper, brittle substitutes. In Nepal, engineers working on the $216 million Chinese-built airport reported low-grade wiring and plumbing fixtures, purchased in bulk from suppliers offering the cheapest deals, not the best performance. A former project manager from a large Chinese construction firm admitted off the record, "We knew the materials wouldn't last, but the priority was speed. Finish fast. Deliver on time. Peer successful. Peer successful. That's the key. Because this wasn't about building infrastructure that would last 50 or 70 years. It was about getting the photo op cutting the ribbon. Signing the deal. Quality control, mostly on paper. Independent audits, rarely allowed. Safety certifications, issued by friendly partners with no incentive to tell the truth. And here's where the problem explodes. Because infrastructure isn't like plastic toys or disposable electronics. You can't cut corners on a highway and expect it to hold. You can't water down concrete and expect the bridge to stand. But that's exactly what happened. Over and over again. The steel plants feeding these projects were running at massive volume, built for speed, not strength. The cement factories operated with loose tolerances. The middlemen in the supply chain shaved off quality at every step to squeeze extra profits. The result? A system that's optimized to win contracts, not to deliver results. And while the world applauded the scale of Belt and Road, the rot was already setting in beneath the surface. Because when the materials fail, the projects fail. And when the projects fail, the countries that trusted China are left holding the bag. But here's the twist. That was always part of the plan. When the power plant breaks down, when the bridge needs repairs after just a few years, Beijing is right there offering another loan, another contract, another handshake deal that keeps the country locked in. Dependent, debt traps, maintenance traps, and above all, trust traps. Because the promise wasn't to build the best. The promise was to build fast, to build often, and to keep the buyer on the hook. But now, the failures are piling up too fast to hide. And the world is asking the one question China can't afford to hear. How much of this so-called Belt and Road was built to last? Or was it all just smoke and mirrors from the start? The cracks aren't just in the bridges. They're in the balance sheets. Because every broken project, every collapsed highway, every leaking airport leaves behind something even more dangerous than bad headlines. Unpaid bills, lawsuits, defaulted loans, and at the heart of it all, the big Chinese state-owned construction giants, the companies that Beijing counted on to deliver its global infrastructure empire. For years, firms like China Communications Construction Company, CCCC, China Railway Group, and Power China boasted about their role in the Belt and Road Initiative, billions of dollars in overseas contracts, dozens of major projects stretching from Africa to Eastern Europe. But now, those same companies are stuck fighting legal battles, chasing unpaid debts, watching their reputation sink right alongside the projects they built. Take CCCC, one of the largest players in the Belt and Road portfolio. The company has faced multiple lawsuits over its work on Kenya's standard gauge railway. Environmental violations, cost overruns, allegations of bribery, and inflated contract prices, all while the railway itself struggles to turn a profit. In Pakistan, the Karakoram highway expansion has become a financial sinkhole. Chinese contractors walked away from parts of the project after costs spiraled out of control and safety issues stalled progress. Local communities are now protesting, not just against the government, but directly against the Chinese firms who failed to deliver. In Malaysia, a major Belt and Road rail link was suspended mid-construction after a new government accused Chinese contractors of overcharging and corruption. The project only resumed after a brutal renegotiation that slashed the contract value by nearly a third. These aren't isolated cases. They're part of a pattern. Because when the system is built on cutting corners, when quality is sacrificed for speed and scale, the cost doesn't just show up in cracked concrete. It shows up in lawsuits, in canceled deals, in companies scrambling to fix their own mess before the backlash spreads. Inside China, the pressure is just as intense. Several of the biggest state-owned builders are now facing serious cash flow problems. Over the past 2 years, analysts from Bloomberg and Nikkei Asia reported that at least 5 major Chinese infrastructure firms delayed payments to suppliers and subcontractors, many of whom are already operating on razor-thin margins. These subcontractors, often small to mid-sized firms, and when the money stops flowing, they're the first to fall. Bankruptcies across China's construction sector have surged. In 2024 alone, over 1,200 small construction-related companies filed for insolvency, the highest rate in a decade. Most blamed unpaid bills from larger state-owned partners tied to overseas belt and road contracts. One executive at a mid-tier engineering firm based in Shanghai put it bluntly in an anonymous interview with Reuters. "We don't get paid unless the project gets used. But if the bridge fails, if the airport leaks, there's no revenue. And no one wants to pay for repairs." The nightmare scenario? These failures aren't just limited to a few bad projects overseas. The financial pain is boomeranging back into China itself, eating away at the balance sheets of the firms that Beijing relies on to build its domestic infrastructure. Debt loads are piling up, credit ratings under pressure, suppliers going unpaid, subcontractors shutting their doors. And here's the deeper danger. Once trust is lost, the pipeline dries up. African governments are starting to blacklist certain Chinese contractors. Southeast Asian nations are demanding stricter terms, outside audits, and international quality guarantees before they'll sign new deals. Even Eastern European partners are quietly looking elsewhere, because no one wants to bet their country's future on a partner who can't deliver. China's big builders tried to flood the world with projects, but now they're drowning in their own mistakes. The very companies that were supposed to be the face of China's rise are now the face of its failures. And as the lawsuits grow, as the debts pile up, the question is no longer whether these firms can finish the job. The question is whether they can survive the fallout. When a bridge collapses, it makes the headlines. But when the paychecks stop coming, that's when the real damage begins. Because behind every megaproject, every port, every highway, every power plant, there are thousands of workers. Crews of welders, electricians, drivers, concrete mixers, crane operators. And below them, layers of subcontractors, equipment suppliers, materials vendors. And when the big state-owned builders run out of money, these are the people left holding the bag. In Kenya, dozens of local subcontractors who worked on the standard gauge railway say they haven't been fully paid. Some have already shut down their small businesses. Others are drowning in unpaid bank loans, debt they took on to buy equipment and materials for a project that was supposed to lift the region's economy. In Pakistan, laborers on the Karakoram highway expansion have staged multiple protests over unpaid wages. Footage from local news shows groups of workers blocking construction sites, demanding months of back pay. Some of these men are fathers who left their villages to work on what they were told was the project of the century. Now they're stuck, broke, and angry. In Laos, at a belt and road-funded dam project, suppliers of cement and steel reported delays of more than 6 months on payments from Chinese contractors. One local company simply went under, unable to survive the gap between delivery and payment. This is the hidden cost of China's world factory model, a model built on pushing pressure down the chain. From the top-tier state-owned builders, down through mid-level subcontractors, all the way to the men and women on the ground. And when that chain breaks, the ones at the bottom fall first. In Thailand, the fallout from a collapsed Chinese-funded infrastructure project forced a wave of layoffs across dozens of small firms tied to the job. Local contractors who supplied machinery, scaffolding, and logistics reported that they had to fire workers or close down entirely after Chinese partners refused to honor payment terms. The damage isn't just financial, it's personal. Families who depended on steady construction jobs are now struggling to pay school fees. Young men who moved to the cities for work are heading back home, broke, humiliated, and unemployed. In China itself, the story is just as grim. Inside the country, smaller subcontractors who supported the overseas infrastructure machine are also collapsing. In 2024, bankruptcy filings among Chinese engineering and construction SMEs, small and medium enterprises, hit a 10-year high. The cause? Cash flow seized up as major partners like China Communications Construction Company and China Railway delayed or defaulted on payments. One manager at a mid-sized logistics firm near Guangzhou summed it up. "We provided cranes, trucks, support crews for a belt and road project in Southeast Asia. The project stalled, the payments stopped. Now I'm shutting down my company. My guys, they're out of work." And this is where the Belt and Road becomes something much darker than a failed foreign policy. Because the ripple effect doesn't just cross borders. It crosses class lines. It hits the small contractors, the truck drivers, the laborers, the people who believe the promises. The ones who thought these projects meant a better future. Instead, they got debt. They got layoffs. They got empty pay envelopes. While the big firms scramble to renegotiate deals and manage damage control, the people at the bottom of the chain are being crushed. And the anger is growing. Protests by unpaid workers have flared across multiple belt and road sites. In some cases, Chinese contractors responded by tightening security. In others, local police stepped in to break up demonstrations. But the frustration isn't going away. Because when the money runs out, the truth comes out. The Belt and Road wasn't built to lift people up. It was built to lock governments into contracts, to make headlines, to build influence. But influence doesn't pour concrete. Influence doesn't hold up bridges. And influence doesn't put food on the table for the men and women who show up to work. The human cost of Beijing's failed infrastructure empire is now impossible to hide. And the question echoing across job sites from Africa to Asia is simple. Who pays the price when the dream collapses? The answer? The workers. Always the workers. The fallout from China's infrastructure failures isn't just about broken bridges and unpaid workers. It's about broken trust. Because when a country bets its future on a foreign partner, hands over its highways, its ports, its power plants, and those promises fall apart, the damage goes far beyond the balance sheet. It hits the national psyche. It triggers a reckoning. Across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe, the very regions Beijing hoped to bind to its orbit, frustration is turning into resistance. In Kenya, public outrage over the standard gauge railway has grown louder with every passing year. Critics call it a railway to nowhere, a debt sinkhole that benefits foreign contractors while burdening Kenyan taxpayers for generations. In Malaysia, the East Coast Rail Link project, one of Belt and Road's flagship deals, was suspended after a change of government. The reason? Corruption allegations, overpricing, and cost inflation. The new leadership renegotiated the contract, slashing nearly 30% off the original price. A quiet admission that something wasn't right from the start. In Sri Lanka, the now infamous Hambantota port, financed and built by Chinese firms, became a textbook case of debt trap diplomacy. Unable to service the loan, Sri Lanka was forced to hand over control of the port on a 99-year lease to Beijing. The backlash was immediate. Politicians accused China of imperial ambitions disguised as development aid. And it's not just the governments pushing back. It's the people. Local communities who were promised jobs, roads, and prosperity are now standing in the shadows of half-finished projects, surrounded by debt, unemployment, and environmental damage. Protests have broken out in Pakistan's Gwadar region, where Chinese-funded infrastructure projects have displaced fishing communities without delivering the promised economic benefits. The sentiment is raw. Resentment against foreign control, against broken promises. In Nepal, farmers living near the Chinese-funded airport in Pokhara, the one that leaks when it rains, have questioned why millions were spent on a project so poorly executed that airlines refused to operate there. This erosion of trust has opened the door for a counteroffensive. Not with bombs, but with standards. The United States, Japan, the European Union, and their G7 allies have quietly rolled out the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII, an initiative designed to compete directly with Belt and Road. But instead of flashy groundbreakings and oversized ribbon cuttings, PGII is offering something Beijing failed to deliver: transparency, accountability, third-party audits, environmental protections, labor standards. And that's the twist, because the failure of Belt and Road isn't just in the steel and concrete. It's in the very strategy. Beijing gambled that countries would overlook the cracks, that speed and size could outshine quality and trust. But now the cracks are impossible to ignore, and America and its partners are filling the vacuum. In Eastern Europe, Poland and the Czech Republic have already cooled on BRI projects, citing transparency issues and shifting their attention to Western alternatives. In Africa, nations like Ghana and Nigeria are exploring deals with American and European firms that offer stricter oversight and better terms. Beijing tried to buy influence, but influence bought on debt and disappointment doesn't last. Even within China, policymakers are starting to admit that the Grand Belt and Road vision may need recalibration. Behind closed doors, discussions are shifting toward damage control, reducing exposure, renegotiating terms, quietly shelving risky deals. But the global narrative is already turning. What was once sold as China's peaceful rise is now viewed by many as a strategic blunder, a case study in how not to build global influence. And in Washington, the message couldn't be clearer. You don't have to outspend Beijing. You just have to outlast them. Because when the bridges fall, and the roads crack, and the ports sit empty, the world remembers. Not the headline, not the photo op, but the failure. The Belt and Road was meant to connect the world. But instead, it's disconnecting China from the trust it worked so hard to build. The question now is no longer whether BRI can recover. The question is, who will take China's place when the dust finally settles? China dreamed of connecting the world, one bridge, one railway, one port at a time. But the dream is cracking. The roads are breaking. The debt is piling up. And the countries that once lined up to join Beijing's grand vision are now quietly stepping away. This wasn't just bad engineering. It was bad strategy. Because in the end, you can't build global power on faulty foundations. You can't win trust with broken promises. And here's the real twist. The more China spends trying to fix the cracks, the more it exposes the rot at the core of its entire system. So now the question is this: can Beijing still hold on to its global ambitions? Or is this just the first sign of a long, slow collapse? Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is far from over.